Hey guys, how's it going? Anime Bar Lounge here, still figuring out some stuff for YouTube, ordering some new audio and video materials that'll hopefully help me make better videos. But for now, we're using whatever free tools I have, so apologize for any low quality, but I've got something fun for us today. One of my favorite video games is Fire Emblem, so today we're going to make a Fire Emblem tier list. Now, there are a lot of Fire Emblem tier lists out there, and you can use them as a reference to see if they sync up with your opinions, but this is the most objective Fire Emblem tier list you'll find. So make sure that if you want your friends to know factual information, this is a tier list you have them refer to. So first of all, I haven't beaten every Fire Emblem game, much to my dismay, so while I am the most resourceful and accurate Fire Emblem video gamer that you'll find on the market, unfortunately, I still have some time until my information is up to date. So let's just get that out of the way. I haven't finished Thracia. Haven't finished the third game. And I haven't beaten New Mystery. So there's that. And then we'll order these so that we'll go right in chronological order based off the ones I have actually beaten. So, good enough for now. So, first game, I think we can feel comfortable placing that right in the middle, right at C tier. It's pretty good if you play it, especially on anything that lets you speed it up. But it's missing a lot of more refinements that come later in the series. No weapon triangle. A lot of things are either unusable or very busted. Stat ups are a complete joke as they increase your character's parameters by such an absurd margin that a complete joke unit can totally just turn around. But honestly, in some ways, that's fun. Completely fine. So yeah, C tier for that. Here, moving on, we're going to go for a hot take. We're going to put Gaiden right at B tier. I actually really love Fire Emblem Gaiden. If I was forced to play NES Fire Emblem for the rest of my life, I'd probably play the first game for a few minutes and then be like, alright, this game's shit. Let's fucking fire up a real man's game. I think this game's way ahead of its time, and you can find elements in it in other Fire Emblem games. As someone whose first Fire Emblem game was Sacred Stones, I think I find a lot of appreciation knowing that Sacred Stones seems to have taken a lot of inspiration from this game, at least from my perspective. It's very slow, gameplay-wise, so it's definitely not for everyone, and I'm sure a lot of people prefer Echoes, which we'll get to later, but this game has a fond memory in my heart. I played it for the first time back in high school and never finished it back then, but then after I dropped out of college, I fired it back up and had a great time with it, so yeah. Our first S tier is going to go right to Genealogy. This game has a lot of issues, but it has a lot of things that make up for it. It is a very hard game to get up into, with or without a guide, in my opinion. Some people can jump right into it and have a great time. For me, it took me over 3 tries to get into this game before I actually got past the first few chapters. And that wasn't even because I was having a hard time beating the chapters. If you're used to other Fire Emblem games, you're used to what a typical chapter looks like, and a typical chapter in Genealogy does not look like a typical chapter in any other Fire Emblem game. You are typically going through many objectives, and each objective you achieve kind of just recontextualizes either the goal or story or what have you in every single chapter. And that can make for some really interesting things, but it can also be a bit jarring. I think the prologue is a really good level for introducing this. It doesn't feel overwhelming. Well, I guess it does for a prologue, but I mean, the size of the prologue, while still huge, is nothing really that crazy when you consider that you're using mostly mounted units. So it's fine. It's pretty fun. Sigurd is one of the most interesting lords since he's just sort of a... It's basically if you just had a Jagan and a Lord at the same time. I won't be spoiling anything in these either. These are just my opinions, and I'm trying to give them fairly quick. Um, but yeah, genealogy. If you pair up, uh, you can pair up units, and that's pretty cool. So it has a lot of replayability. The units you pair up and support will have different children, and those children will have different stats and growths and skills based off who you paired up, which makes it so that if you're me, I actually did use a guide the first time because I wanted to know whether or not my second generation units were screwed or not. And I have very strong opinions over which characters support who as a result. But I honestly think if it's your first time playing, you shouldn't really use a guide, and you should form your own opinions. Or that's just me. It's totally valid to use a guide for this game, especially if you don't want to go in blind or you're worried about missing out. Play the game how you want to play. At the end of the day, that's the best way to go about it. Moving on. Fire Emblem 6. This was the first game, non-localized Fire Emblem game I had played. When I was in high school, I found a friend playing it on the laptop at school, and I was so enamored with the fact that he was playing Fire Emblem. I was like, how is this man doing this? What sort of black magic did this man summon? And then when I saw Roy, I was like, wait, this guy's playing a Fire Emblem game that is in English, even though I know for a fact that I've only ever seen this game in Japanese. I am even more confused. And so this man showed me some of his black magic, and through many years of training in the dark arts, I learned how to magically understand Japanese and make it appear as if it were in English, and I was able to play Fire Emblem 6 with Roy in all his glory. I actually really like Fire Emblem 6. I actually like most of the Game Boy Advance Fire Emblems. I consider them the best starting point for new players. I know a lot of people might recommend the newer games to new players, which is fair in some regards because they have a lot of modes that make them easier to access. But I personally really prefer teaching players permadeath because I think the consequences for your actions makes Fire Emblem a really fun game. And I always think that there should be some punishment for making bad choices, because I think when there isn't punishment for making bad choices, what you end up with is a game that teaches poor behavior and habits. You don't get punished for overextending or bad placement, and then you never learn as a result, which is fine if you just want the story of the game, but I personally really like Fire Emblem for the gameplay experience, and so those sort of elements really appeal to me. Anyway, we're going to put this right in the A tier. Out of all the Game Boy Advance games, I actually would consider it my favorite, edging out even 7. It's very hard, in some ways unfair. I actually really like playing it on hard mode because some units go from good to straight busted. I think that the balance in this game is some of the worst. It's probably one of its most glaring flaws. But balance isn't always as important in Fire Emblem as others may pretend. The only issue is that if you have a character you really like, and they're not a good unit, it can be a little heartbreaking if you're playing a hard mode and you want to use Sophia in Vanilla 6 or any other character with similar issues. If you're playing on hard mode, you're mostly depending on using the characters that come busted, like Rudger or Percival, and going from there. We'll go straight into 7. I feel comfortable enough putting this in A2. I think it has issues. My biggest issue is that if you're playing it for the first time, whether you just picked up the game for your first time or it's a new copy that you bought or you're reacquiring it from somewhere or you downloaded it on some sort of I think it was very briefly available on the 3DS if you bought the 3DS when it was originally released. yeah, you're forced to play Lin mode, which is a tutorial, and if you already know how to play Fire Emblem, a forced tutorial is a punishment I wouldn't wish on my worst enemies. If you already know how to play the game, you don't want to be taught how to play the game. You don't want to be forced to promote Wallace with a Night Crest that would go better to a different character. I realize you're not going to get the Night Crest if you just play Eliwood mode, but that's aside the point. Forced tutorial, awful, awful. Plot in Lin mode isn't even that bad, but you spend, like, I swear, the first 7 out of 10 chapters of Lin mode have some form of tutorial to them. And it really just bogs down the whole experience for me personally. Sacred Stones, there's some nostalgia here, but we are just going to straight up put Sacred Stones in A tier as well. I have an extreme strong opinion and nostalgia for the Game Boy Advance games. They are, again, I would consider them the pinnacle of Fire Emblem, especially for new players. Sacred Stones even has a split path, and I really like that because you get a different experience on your first playthrough and then the replayability on subsequent playthroughs. And also, anything that allows for interesting discourse and discussion between players on preferences is great. You already have that with units, but stuff like split paths opens that discussion further and lets people discuss more things and other interesting mechanics of the game and other, things like for unit viability, you get to also discuss that based off the paths. Like, Ephraim is obviously a really powerful character, but if you go on Erica route, he's slightly less so, but not by enough for it to really matter, but still worth discussing nonetheless. Path of Radiance is going to go right in S tier. Path of Radiance, especially the English version, is one of the easiest Fire Emblem games of all time. But damn, is it really fun, and the characters, in my opinion, are really balanced. You can use pretty much any character out the box, and this is partially because bonus experience is one of the most broken mechanics ever introduced in a Fire Emblem game. And I am completely okay with that, because when I have a favorite unit, my favorite thing to do, especially in a casual playthrough, is to dump a bunch of favoritism in there. I like to keep everyone relatively balanced, but if I have a favorite unit, the first to get promoted and the first to get all the good forged weapons and stat boosters is probably going to be that unit. And Path of Radiance, just with some exceptions, like having bosses that are mostly resilient to characters that don't have plot armor, for the most part, you can really just pick your favorite unit and watch them decimate an entire battlefield, and I think most Fire Emblem players, to some extent, really like that feeling. It's a really cathartic feeling, and when I'm not playing Fire Emblem on the hardest difficulty and suffering, my favorite thing to do is just pick a favorite unit, throw them out on the battlefield, and watch them slaughter the entire enemy forces, and this is one of the easiest Fire Emblem games for me to achieve that. The story is really good. I really like the Telia story. It has some cliches, it has some issues, but nothing that, for me, is worth overanalyzing or over-criticizing. This game is the one I've played the most. I've beaten it over 15 times. I still own a copy of it somewhere, thank goodness, because I haven't checked the price in a while, but I know that it is a hard game to acquire and is quite expensive. Oh, yeah. Moving on to Radiant Dawn. Radiant Dawn is probably my favorite Fire Emblem game of all time. It's going to go right in here. Now, Radiant Dawn also has a ton of issues. Honestly, I feel like some of the things Path of Radiance did right, Radiant Dawn just does wrong. We'll focus on what it does right, in my opinion, first, though. I like the division into parts. While in some ways it's done poorly for the most part, I like that you can sort of look at each part in a different light once you've finished the whole thing. Part 1 has mostly focused on the Dawn Brigade. Part 2 is focused on the Crimea storyline. Part 3 kind of focuses largely on the Grail Mercenaries, but it's also the longest part and focuses back and forth on all three factions we've brought up until now. And then part 4 has a sort of endgame thing where you have all your armies that you've been building up over the course of the entire game, split into 3 different paths, all converging into one massive army that you get to bring with you for the final chapter of the game. For part 1, the Dawn Brigade is fine, except for the fact that they're not fine for the rest of the game. Let me explain. If you were to play part 1 and then turn off your console after you beat part 1, for whatever reason you just beat part 1, satisfied with the whole experience, you would never know that the Dawn Brigade has issues because you'd never have anything else to compare them to. When it comes to playing the later chapters, especially in higher difficulties where you're getting less experience for these units to have potential good level ups and promotions, you'll notice by comparison to some of the really good Crimean forces and the Grail Mercenaries that you're mostly just going to end up benching half the units that you get in part 1 and focusing largely on the units that are very good just out of the box. Nolan, most Earth Affinity characters actually, Nolan, Valug, Zehark. Soth's okay because he starts promoted. Micaiah has utility, so she's fine, I guess. But by and large, not only do you not have the best units in the Dawn Brigade, Edward is fine in my opinion, but he's overshadowed by Zehark, and he's much more of an investment. Leonardo's one of the worst archers in the game. Meg is awful. Fiona's awful and can't even be deployed in one of the chapters, I'm pretty sure. And what really gets me is that a lot of the chapters in part 3 that you need to use the Dawn Brigade for have a ton of Laguz units, and the game thought it was okay for plot reasons to take away Tormod, Vika, and Moraine. I don't know how to pronounce that name, so correct me however it's supposed to be called. I'm just going to call him Green Tiger from now on so that at least I can take confidence that I'm pronouncing that right. So Vika's pretty bad. She's a flyer, so maybe she could do something, but with her stats, she wasn't going to do much anyway. So nothing really of value lost there. But in some of the harder chapters, especially the ones where you're fighting Laguz, Tormod and Green Tiger would have been really good. And that's just something I've thought of recently every time I replay Radiant Dawn, is how the game literally takes away from the Dawn Brigade in part 3, units that you've been using in part 1. But it doesn't really punish you like this for the Grail Mercenaries or the 1 or 2 chapters you play as the Crimean forces in part 3. And it's just really odd to me because you could take away from either of those 2 and come out relatively fine, but you take from the one that is already suffering. And that's just my biggest gripe, is that as you progress, each part has its own unique feeling, but part 3 is the most jumbled, and despite being my favorite part for its plot and some of its levels, it also has some of the worst in both regards as well. You have quite a large cast, which I quite like, but 72 characters is quite a lot. But it's also fine if you're playing a Nuzlocke, or even if you just decide fuck it once you get to a certain point. It's pretty common in Radiant Dawn, even if I'm resetting when a character dies, to just get to a point where a unit dies because of bad placement or bad RNG, and I'm like, you know what, I have over 70 characters that I can choose from. I'm sure I can come out on okay on the other side with a sacrifice here and there. Bonus experience is back in this one. It's actually even more abusable because you're guaranteed exactly 3 stat ups. which means you can cap a few stats and then get stats that a character was never going to get anyway. Tier 3 promotions are here. Overall, great game. Next up, we have Shadow Dragon, which is going to go right in C tier in front of the first game. It's superior overall, but I don't think it does that much for it. Replacement units are pretty interesting for anyone who's seen Emblem will especially agree. It's also a good game for new players, I'd say. I don't really have much to say about it other than that. Let's see, I haven't played 12. Oh, yeah, alright, so we're on newer Fire Emblem now, and as someone who's played back in ye old days, starting with Sacred Stones, newer Fire Emblem is a bit of a beast to contend with for me, because I've changed my opinion on pretty much all the games left back and forth several times. So we will start with Awakening, which I feel confident putting right in B tier. Yeah, I guess that's fine. Awakening does a lot of things that, especially on a first playthrough, feel really fresh and exciting. But for me personally, it's far from my favorite. It doesn't do too much to shake up the formula if you're coming from the Game Boy series, but it also does enough where, because at its time it had a flux of new fans, there's this point in history that you can really see a lot of discourse between older and new fans if you were around at the time. Thankfully, I think we've grown out of that, and it's a bit cringe to look back on just because I think it's silly to get into pointless arguments over video games. Although I say pointless, but I do find a lot of value in productive and respectful discussion on these games. So I'm mostly referring to people that weren't really discussing or having productive arguments, just people that were mad because they didn't like each other's favorite Fire Emblem game. I think my biggest issue is just that this is around the time where you start seeing so many different skills, and I guess I don't know how to exactly word it, but like, they were fine in 9 and 10, and I actually really liked them. So at first I thought I really liked them in Awakening, but I think I spend so much time figuring out builds for units when I really just want to play the game. But when I play the game in harder modes, if I'm not thinking ahead, it's very easy to get punished, especially in Lunatic and Lunatic Plus. So for me, I prefer to play Awakening on hard mode. Normal mode is way too easy, I don't have to think. Lunatic is way too hard, I have to use a guide. Hard is perfect, I can play the game at my own pace. I don't have to use a guide. I don't have to figure out what the best builds are. I can usually get by just by using good units, reclassing them occasionally, and not usually having to use the child characters. With a few exceptions, I don't really care for the child characters. I usually just like to level up the units I get early in Awakening and call it a day. I haven't played this game in a while, so if I'm running out of things to say or it's at this point in the video where it seems like I just don't have a lot to say, that's exactly why. It's been like 5 years since I've played this game. We will move on to Fates now, and we will address the elephant in the room. This belongs right here, and I am very confident in this decision. something needs to be on the failing grade on this tier list, and this to me is exactly what that is. The gameplay and the story on this path are garbage. If you like this game, I'm happy for you. But for me personally, the fact that you have to buy Fates and then you can't buy Revelations by itself, so you are guaranteed spending at least $60 when the game came out to even play this game, is a joke. The maps are bad, the designs are bad, everything to it is bad. I would probably need to actually come up with a scripted idea for a video to really go into why I don't like this one, but I'll leave my opinion to speak for itself. I think most people that have played it are fine with it. If I'm looking for something nice to say, just so that, I had something bad to say about the top tiers, I might as well find something good to say about the bottom bitch. It's playable, and I like that you don't have to choose which of the royals you get, which feels like it defeats the purpose, since the whole point of the game was to make a difficult decision at the start. The fact that there is a path that says fuck that and basically lets you just get both sides to join you, and you have 8 overpowered royals, Corrin and Azura. I think it had potential to be a really good third story path, especially if you've beaten both of the other ones. But the fact that it basically just feels like once you have all 3 paths, you either have to make a difficult decision or let's just save everyone and go get the real ending, but the real ending isn't that good. It just feels really off to me. Birthright, also not good, but better than this. I actually like a few of the maps in Birthright, and I think that's what makes it even worth talking about here. And I'll get into this in a second, but my issue with both of these is I don't know how to put it into words, but I like Sacred Stones where you can just grind and make it powerful, and with DLC you can do it in this too. But something about newer Fire Emblem where you can just infinitely grind, I guess because the caps feel, the ceiling for growth is so much higher, it feels like if you're even playing on a harder mode, I feel more encouraged to just grind my way out of the solution rather than actually come up with a strategy. And that might be a failing on my end, but it's an opinion I hold nonetheless. We're just going to put this right here, though. As bad as Fates is overall for me, and as much as I'm not a big fan of it, I don't even like the story of any of these paths. But Conquest, if I'm playing it on hard mode, I've played it on Lunatic, I beat it on Lunatic, it was a fun time up until I'd say chapter 20. By chapter 20, I feel like just the last few chapters were just complete and utter insanity. Maybe I was just spent by that point. The final chapter especially, I remember using like some sort of cheesy strategy. I think you get a revival staff. I'm not entirely sure, but I feel like I definitely recall using a strategy I was trying to avoid to beat the game. But for the most part, especially chapters like Chapter 10 and the Dragon Vein, I think that Conquest does them all the best. And I really like that it does what I liked most in Fire Emblem, which is you beat a map, you go on to the next map, you play that map, rinse and repeat. The story isn't all there, and on replays, I don't really spend any time reading the story or looking at supports. But for just the gameplay aspect, I think it's up here with the big boys, and I'm completely fine with that. Echoes. Right here. Actually, Let's make this a hot take. Let's put it down here. I like Gaiden more than Echoes, and that's probably going to be the hottest take of this video. And if you stuck around this long, this is probably where you hit the dislike button and realize that when I said that this was the most objective Fire Emblem, I meant it was the most objective for me personally, not for anyone else watching. I actually really like Echoes, but I think it has issues, and I think that issues puts it here in the middling spot. I feel like Gaiden came out, and when they decided to remake it, they tried to stay faithful, and I think that was a great decision. I actually like that they tried to stay faithful. But I don't think they fixed some of the issues, and I think they even made some worse. Because I think they tried to solve the issues through DLC. With DLC, you can grind faster, and you can unlock stronger promotion paths. And in my opinion, from playing both the original Gaiden and Echoes, this is a game where you're probably going to grind. But at least Gaiden had a lot of cheesy shit you could do to make that grinding faster. Some of that cheesy shit was nerfed in this game. Oh, but how can you get around that? Oh, you can get the DLC, and now you can grind fast and get those really high-tier promotion paths. It's perfectly fine if you're playing through this game without DLC. It's perfectly doable, but I feel like there's so much incentive that it's kind of just annoying. Maybe that's a bad take, but I don't really care. That's just what I feel. The best thing about Echoes is that I do really like, one thing it has over this is that this has not aged well, and I don't think this will either, at least gameplay-wise, but cinematic-wise, I think there's something special about Echoes, and I think it's something special that no other Fire Emblem game has quite achieved yet. It feels timeless in a way, and I don't think even Three Houses achieves quite the same thing. It's hard to put into words, but that's just what I'm feeling, so that's just what I'm saying. Well, Three Houses, yeah, that goes right in A tier. Three Houses was a great game. I think it even solved whatever this fucking shit was trying to do. 3 different paths, okay, but are they good? Are they fun to play? Am I ever going to replay them? Is there any reason to replay them? Are the lords all likable? And for me, I would say yes, I like all the lords. I like all the paths. I have an opinion for which path is the best. I started with Edelgard and thought Edelgard was going to be my favorite, but then I played Claude's path, and then I'm like, oh shit, no, Claude's where it at. Claude is my homie. And then I played Dimitri, and I'm like, oh this guy has a really tragic backstory, and I can really get behind it. Fucking Blue Lions is where it's at. And then there's even a 4th path if you go down that path, and then there's DLC, and maybe that DLC sucks because DLC is something that you don't like. But honestly, I got it, and I actually enjoyed it, and I didn't mind spending the extra money on it. So I really liked what this game did. You can grind the hell out of your units, which is a thing I already brought up having an issue with, but it's less of an issue in this one, because if you're playing on a harder difficulty, that shit's limited. That means that the game is built with the idea that you're probably not power grinding your units to an absurd degree, and there's, with some exception, there's not any DLC that really makes the game easier. I've beaten the game on Maddening on Edelgard's path, and I can say that Maddening is a little bit too extreme for my taste, but it's perfectly beatable. It takes a bit of luck, I feel, on some missions, but I think overall it's fine. I prefer playing the game on hard mode. I think that's the perfect difficulty for me. I just like beating each Fire Emblem game on the hardest difficulty for the bragging rights. So this was a completely unscripted video. This is mostly just because I'm trying to get better at recording. I can definitely say that I need to get better at not using filler words like a lot, but I think that's just part of the whole learning process, And so, with absolutely no regrets, this video is getting uploaded as soon as I hit the stop button. I hope you enjoyed. Yeah, see ya.